just that. All right. So we're seeing the big screen. Can I see a nod or two? Yes. All right. Fabulous. All right. So today we're talking about portfolio optimization and strategy. And by talking about it, I'm going to talk to all the things and components that lead up to the point where you are able to do your optimization strategy. Like if you build it right, you don't have to work that hard on the optimization strategy piece. So I'll talk to you about the building blocks. And our format here, while I have a PowerPoint and all that sort of jazz, we're pretty informal. So please put things in the chat if you have questions or comments or just random thoughts along the way. Silly things to add is always good. Um, if you want to chat, certainly you can come off mute and we can, you can comment. Not everyone is comfortable doing that. I know some folks, this is your lunch hour, so you might be eating. But we're pretty informal. I'm sure at some point Marianne and Greg will chime in about things as well. So, don't be shy, folks. And again, if you're eating or you just you don't want to be vocal, like the chat is always available. All right. So all that being said, so let's get moving. All right. So today, as we're talking about this, I'm going to start with portfolio maintenance and portfolio management, which are two slightly different things, and why they both matter. So we all hang on, sorry, computer issue. So we all seem to struggle with getting our portfolios to the point where we're happy with them, right? And it's not for lack of trying, because we work really hard at this. But sometimes I think we need to take a little step back in order to get, ideas from others and see our portfolio challenges in a new light. So at the end of the day, we have some basic portfolio ideals that we want to achieve. Perhaps like what I listed here on the screen. These are pretty broad, I realize, but I think these, I think these probably resonate with most folks. And the reality is, these kind of ideals are very attainable, which is good news. But there's a lot of moving parts involved in getting us to this point. So how did we get there, right? So let's talk about that. And for those who are newer to this, I also don't read my slides. So this is being recorded, so you can go back and read them later, or you can try to scribble stuff down as we go. But I don't read the slides because I know y'all can read them. So, so first, let's talk about the portfolio maintenance and portfolio management. I think sometimes we use those terms interchangeably, and while they're related, they're not the same thing. So portfolio management, that's the strategy that dictates how your portfolio is going to be created and how you're going to sustain them. Where the maintenance is that work that's done on a portfolio to make sure that it's being created and sustained over time, and you're making adjustments along the way. That's to help me think about things, because I always use really terrible analogies. I think about this like if we wanted to build a high-rise office building. So think of ourselves as the investors, and we get to work with the architect and the designer to create blueprints for the building, right? Then we hire a construction management company. And what a construction management company, for those of you who haven't worked for one, I have, they're given the designs and the blueprints, and they determine what subcontractors they're going to hire and what building supplies they're going to need to create this building. That construction management, they hire the carpenters, the masons, the electricians, the plumbers, the HVAC person, the elevator installer, all those sorts of things. And they approve all the building supply orders to make sure all the right pieces are coming in. The construction management people, they oversee the project, they create a strategy for whether or not the electric goes in first or the elevator goes in first or the plumbing goes in first to make sure all the supplies are on site and then two different contractors aren't trying to work on top of each other at any one given moment. And if there's delay, the construction management company is the one that's responsible for explaining that to the investors. Now, all the subcontractors, they do the maintenance in the scenario, right? They do the actual hands-on work. They hammer in the nails, they drill in the screws, they wire in the electric, they plumb in the pipes and the water, they do all those things. So if you think about the scenario from our point of view, investor is your organization, construction management is project management, and the subcontractors are everyone from research to your gift officers, the people who handle that hands-on work. So that analogy works for me because I used to work for a construction management firm a long time ago. But it's not a perfect analogy, but hopefully it helps to some degree, like putting it in terms of like thinking of building a building. So that's a bit of the difference between management and maintenance as far as your portfolios are concerned. Now, portfolio management, it's a vision for how you want your portfolio to be. It's often based on the goals that may or may not be set by prospect development. Sometimes we get to set them, and sometimes someone above us on the org chart does. Depends on how your organization is structured. But thinking of the goals that you set, these could be your annual goals, your team goals, your campaign goals, your individual fundraiser goals. Those are the goals we're thinking of. And then we use data to inform the strategy for how we want our portfolios to be set up. So as we manage our portfolios, we're concerned with a couple of big things, right? We want the right size portfolio. We want to make sure we have the right balance and blend of prospects in that portfolio. We want to ensure that that portfolio is aligned with the goals. And from a prospect management perspective, which is my happy space, we want to make sure the portfolios are equitable from one gift officer to the next so that we're not asking so much of one and not enough of another. And all the while, we're monitoring the movement of our prospects through the donor cycle stages and using strategy as our guide. As we maintain our portfolios, which is, again, the maintenance piece, we're concerned with a couple of different things, right? Keeping the portfolio size within those predetermined threshold amounts. Like, do we want the size to be between 50 and 60 prospects? So if it gets to 67, is it too big? And how do we whittle it back down? Also, we want to keep the right blend of prospects. So if you have someone who's moving a lot of folks out of the portfolio and we're loading them up with qualification prospects, that might not be ideal for them to reach their goals. So we want to keep an eye on those sorts of things. We need to monitor the prospect movement and add new prospects when necessary. So as we're moving people through to stewardship or out because they're not, either they've made their gift and they're done, or we find that they're not going to be our major gift person, like then we need to move someone else into the portfolio, right? And we want to make sure that the gift officer is able to achieve their goals. Like that's really what a big piece of our job is, as we maintain our portfolios, is making sure the gift officer can actually achieve those goals that have been set by them. So where do we start, right? And we start at the beginning, like thinking about our research queue and our holding pools and how portfolio assignments are made. We have to start there, which seems like we're going backwards when we're talking about portfolios, but if we don't talk about that piece, the rest doesn't work. So let's talk about that piece. So, and let's, as we're talking about it, I'm going to talk about using inventory management techniques to help us manage our holding pools, those prospects that we've researched but we haven't assigned. I'm referring to this as a holding pool. You may call it something different. But when I say holding pool, that's what I mean. They've been researched but not assigned. And then talking about how that impacts our pipeline, these, the people we need to research, and then our holding pools. So inventory management is something that the for-profit sector uses because, they have some great management techniques. And we in the nonprofit sector can adopt and tailor these things to suit our unique workflows and needs. Like it's not that, while they're dealing with, items and widgets or whatever you say, we're dealing with prospects and portfolios. The language is a little different, but a lot of the principles can be applied. And I think it's smart of us as a sector to adopt those for-profit techniques that are working so well for the other people to make money, but they can work very well for us to manage our prospects and further the mission of our organization. Because we're doing better work than that, right? We're doing higher level work. Mission is important. So when it comes to inventory management,
Sorry, Ruthie.
go ahead. So
I have a question. So
yeah.
years ago, Elizabeth Crabtree called this just-in-time prospecting.
Mm-hmm.
For you, is it not just the prospecting, but also having prospects ready?
Yes, it's both.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I think her work with just-in-time prospecting and my thinking about how we manage the portfolios kind of tie into each other.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
So standing on the shoulders of the great one. So when we're talking about inventory management, we can use it to help regulate the inflow of prospect research requests. This is especially important if you work in one of the small shops or a solo office. Larger offices, you might be able to regulate it a little easier. You don't get overwhelmed. But for someone like myself who's worked in a small shop and you're the chief cook and bottle washer of all things prospect development, when you're getting a lot of research requests, it can be overwhelming and it feels like you're never going to get to them. So if we can use inventory management techniques to regulate that a little bit, we don't end up with a glut of people waiting for research, and we don't end up then having a glut of researched prospects who are waiting to get into portfolios. You don't get stuck with too many of anything. So we use inventory manage to help us tailor how our prospect research is done and organized so we don't get that glut. Um, but we want to reduce that sort of like for some of you, you might be familiar with like sort of the we need more prospects mentality. I think of it like Captain Kirk when he's screaming at Scotty, going, "Give me all, give me more power, give me more speed, give me more shields." And Scotty's screaming back, "I'm giving you all I can, Captain. You can't take much more of this, right?" So for you Star Trek nerds, you'll understand that one. Um, Often we're asked, we need more prospects, we need better prospects, we need higher capacity prospects. But we also need to work within our means. And if we already have this pool of people who are researched but not yet assigned, we've done the work. Let's, qualify them first. Let's not keep researching more and more and building that pool because that's a lot of wasted time and effort in there if we're not moving them quickly along. We can start by looking at sort of the cost to create and maintain a holding pool of prospects of these people who are not yet assigned but have already been researched. So here's an example of the cost of, what might be an average holding pool. These are not industry standard numbers. I used easy numbers so I could do easy math for the purpose of example, but it gives you the right idea. So if we have a prospect researcher who's working 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, apparently in my example, they never take a holiday or a vacation or sick day, and they, receive a particular salary. If we assume in this scenario that the average time to do research on a new prospect maybe is 5 hours, and then when you're updating it, maybe it's 3 hours. Again, these aren't industry standard. These are just numbers for easy math. If we assume that a holding pool that has 100 prospects that have already had that first time research done and completed, right? Of those 100 prospects, maybe 60 of them are going to need new updated research at some point before we assign them to a gift officer. Once we assign them, you know, we find that there's a cost to this holding pool, and a cost in dollars because you've already spent this on the salary for the person who's doing the research and their time. So this is over 600 hours of time for a prospect researcher to do this work. So how many prospects do we really? I'm seeing a question. How often do you experience gift officers asking for refreshed research on
I'm
prospects
sorry,
they have not yet
Ruthie, that's
visited?
me. That's me.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
stimulating conversation.
Okay.
Beg your pardon.
Sorry. Thought there was a question to be asked. All right. So I'll let you all talk about that in the chat.
Sorry.
So a lot of times, you want to ask yourself a couple of questions. How many prospects do we need to have in our holding pool at any one time? How long does it take to move a prospect from qualification to stewardship? How fast are these prospects being moved in and out of any one portfolio? On average, how many prospects move out of your portfolio? Are we disqualifying them? Are they totally done giving? Are they moving off to annual giving? And then from there, we want to think about implementing a just-in-time inventory management system practice for our holding pool, right? So just-in-time was developed. I know you mentioned Elizabeth Crabtree talked about it, but it was actually developed by Taichi Ono for Toyota back in the 70s when they didn't want to carry so much physical inventory to build the cars, but they wanted to make sure the cars got out very quickly. Um, so it ensured that they only carried the inventory they needed. They could meet the customer demands, and it cut down on those inventory costs. In our case, our inventory cost is the cost of the research to have been done. So when we apply this concept to our work, we're looking again that research pool and the holding pool. This just-in-time inventory would allow us to control several factors. Like we want to make sure we're getting the right prospects, right time for researching the prospects, right quantity of prospects in the holding pool. If you only have one or two gift officers, if you're a small organization, having 400 people in your holding pool, they're never going to get to them. So we want to make sure that we're setting people up for success, but we're also not using so much time of the researcher to research things that no one's working with yet, because there's other things that person can be doing. But yeah, it allows us to eliminate sort of that waste in the form of too many prospects in the holding pool, the need for prospect research to review and then update people in the holding pool who they maybe haven't even been seen yet. And it uses prospect development to manage these, the use of prospect manager to manage a large holding pool to determine who goes into a portfolio next. Like that takes time. If the holding pool isn't that big, it's easier to figure that out. So historically, the demands on prospect development These were often been made by gift officers and managers as far as asking for research or updated research when a new prospect's placed into portfolio. I believe the ownership of those decisions should live with those closest to the prospect. I think that should be the prospect development team. And again, sometimes you are a solo team of one. But I think the decisions about how many people to research, how big should that holding pool be, how to make assignments and when, I think all that should be living firmly with prospect development, which I know is probably something that the person who manages the gift officers might argue with, but I don't think I'm wrong. Oh, I see another question. Can you share a bit about how a real life example of just in time inventory application would look like? Yes. So if you had, like right now, I'm currently working in a small organization. It's a community college in Western Massachusetts. It's my full time job. And we have one person who is going to carry a portfolio, doesn't have one yet. We don't have any rated prospects. We don't have any portfolios. We don't have anyone coded major gifts, anything like that. So as I'm working to build her portfolio, she's also our vice president of our advancement. She's also the executive director of our foundation. It's a lot. So she doesn't need a big portfolio. So I don't need to research 300 people to get her what she needs. I need to research maybe 30. And then out of those 30, she might have 10 people who actually will be her portfolio. And it needs to start small because we want to see how many she can manage and then build from there. So right now, I think I have her with two prospects. I've only been here a year, with two prospects. And she will eventually get something close to like, I think over time, I think 25 might be the most I'm going to assign to her because she is the executive director of the foundation. She is the vice president of advancement. She does manage our marketing team. She has other things to do. So her portfolio will never be large. But when we get to the point where we have to hire another person, I do want to make sure that I have some people to put into a portfolio for a new hire. So when we're getting to that point, I will start building that out. But it takes time, and you just have to manage it by saying, we don't need 100 people. She just needs 10. So maybe I researched 30. Does that make some sense? Hopefully. And then I see another question or comment here. It's saying, it is more common, I find, with new fundraisers to JHU. Otherwise, if the wealth score is under a year or two, they just reach out.
I think
Yeah.
that's the answer to my question about the gift officers just keep sending the prospects back for more research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because sometimes they're smart enough to realize that they don't need so much research. Sometimes the conversation is going to get them where they need to go.
Mhm.
And sometimes they panic because cold calling isn't easy. I don't envy them their job, right?
Right.
Those cold calls are not easy. So if there is no real warm, even lukewarm relationship, like it can be a little daunting. So sometimes they want a little more information, and I get that. I
Hmm.
totally understand that. But that's why I work doing what I do, not what they do.
Amen.
All right. So I want to talk about another theory that we can also use to help ourselves, and it's called subtraction theory. It helps us to set up and maintain the optimal size portfolio, which is important. So the size of your portfolio needs to be manageable, as does the holding pool. And subtraction theory is this idea that you move away from volume and focus on velocity and value. So in this case, we're talking about prospects, right? So how fast are they moving through a portfolio and how valuable are they to you? Subtraction theory is, I forget who came up with it, and I know I researched it, but I don't have a note on it. But it's been used by companies like Apple used it in the late 90s when they moved from having a lot of products to just a small handful. Southwest Airlines used it when their original model, when they didn't have seating assignments, they didn't have in-flight meals, and they only actually had a couple kinds of planes they flew because that was part of their inventory, right? So it's part of their things. Like if they had to fly 7 different kinds of planes, I think they only had two at the beginning. Like they had to maintain 7 different kinds of planes, but 2 different kinds of planes, it was easier to get parts and maintain and all that sort of thing. But using subtraction theory, we focus less on the volume of prospects and more on the speed that they're moving through the pipeline and the value of those prospects. And value is not simply gift capacity. I know we like to think of it as that. Often that's usually the measure most people use. But I think of it as a set of data points that help you gauge who the best prospects are to focus on, depending on what your goal is. So if you are more in the planned giving realm, gift capacity might matter to a certain degree, but you also might want to know their age. Do they have children? Are they married? Like there's some other data points that matter. So the value, looking at those data points, helps you figure out like who should be in your portfolio or holding pool and who shouldn't. Um, so using subtraction theory, things that you might want to focus on are things like streamlining the pipeline early on. Like, don't be afraid to disqualify a prospect. And I don't mean just throwing them out of a portfolio because someone hasn't gotten to them, but you actually disqualify them because maybe they're ghosting you. Like, your gift officer's been trying and trying to get in front of this person, but they're just not responsive. So rather than having them ad nauseum continue to try to get response out of somebody, disqualify that person, code them properly so you can revisit them later. Be like, we're not losing them, right? And then let that gift officer move on to the next person. Another way to that subtraction theory helps is moving friction from the process. A lot of times we have a lot of steps and stages in our donor cycles and things that our gift officer is supposed to do. They have to make a phone call and an email and a this and a that. And sometimes that's just too much. Like, I've worked places where the documentation of all the little steps and all the little sub steps that someone has to do and all the like if then of if a prospect does this, then that was so well documented. However, it was too much. And I think it loses the gift officer. It's great for those of us who love process. We're like, yoo-hoo, this is the best thing ever. But for those who aren't process people and are more relationship people, you lose them. So maybe if you relax some of that and don't have such stringent guidelines for moving people around, sometimes that helps. But there might be some things that you can eliminate or even skip from all those process because it's just there's so many layers of protocols and approvals and it slows everything down. It could be a little much. Um, and then using subtraction theory, we just get to remove, like I was saying, the portfolio ghosts. If that prospect's been unresponsive, move them out of the way. You can always bring them back in later and move on to the next prospect. But do it sooner rather than later because you want to make sure that you're using your gift officer time in the best way possible. So you're getting the best return on investment for their efforts as well. All right. So some of you may recognize this stunning visual, which I'm not a good visual person, I'll admit that. But it was in my book if you read the book. If not, this is new to you. Yippee. Um, but as we think about subtraction theory, less is more. So each big, I don't know, I'm kind of hungry. So these are like cookies. Sometimes they look like chocolate chip pancakes to me, but today they look like cookies. So each big cookie represents a portfolio. In one portfolio, it's based on the quantity of prospects, which historically I think is how we did things because before prospect management, we had no other way to manage them. So we just threw them all in portfolios and hoped for the best. And often they got lost. The other one is based on quality. So in the quantity portfolio, the one on the left, there's 35 prospects, 7 of the white dots, those are your high quality ones. And the fundraiser with that portfolio has a 20% chance of working with that high quality person. Whereas the one on the right still has 7 high quality people, but it's only 14 prospects. So they have a 50% chance of working with that high quality prospect. Less is more, right? You're going to get more return on investment from the smaller portfolio because they can cut through the white noise and really get to those people who matter the most. Not that the other folks don't matter, just they might not matter at the moment. This might not be their moment for being your major gift person. But thankfully, prospect management is a thing now. Woohoo! And we don't have to load up our portfolios for fear of losing potential prospects. We have plenty of places to put them and code them so we can find them later and find them at just the right time. So we don't have to panic about this, right? So how do you make the case to your leadership that you should carry smaller portfolios? Which is not always easy, but I mean, but it has to be done. And so we use Dunbar's number. I love Dunbar. This is another stunning graphic from my book for those who've read it. So if it looks familiar and you read the book, that's why. But Robin Dunbar was a British anthropologist, did a lot of work on the brain size of primates and their social groups, and did a lot of work around there. But he proposed that the human brain can't keep more than a human can't really maintain more than a certain number of relationships of a given strength at any one time. And the number he proposed is 150 of meaningful relationships, thinking these are people you could bump into and have a cup of coffee with, like right off the bat, if you saw them on the street. Um, and when we think about this, the 150 people should not be the size of your portfolio. Because remember, these are all the people that you could bump into on the street. This includes your parents, your siblings, your best friend from high school, like all those people, your spouse, your children, all of them are relationships you have to maintain. And so out of those 150, not all of them are your portfolio people. So your portfolio should be smaller. Um, I sort of advocate for portfolios around like the 50 to 75 range. Honestly, I think they could be smaller and you'd still be highly successful, but I think it's hard to make the case to make them smaller right now, because people still lean a little towards having a bigger portfolio because they think somehow there's value in that. But I think if you cut away a lot of the white noise, let them concentrate on maybe 40 to 50 people, and then the next 40 to 50, and then the next 40 to 50, they'll eventually get through those 150 folks just in a much more regulated way. So less is more. Smaller portfolios, always the way. So how do we figure out what the ideal composition is for the portfolio, right? That's the big question, right? And when we look at our portfolios, you know, we want to sort of first we want to review the portfolio and then we want to assess it. So we review it to take a look back and see like who is in the portfolio, what does this look like, what's the current composition? And then based on that current composition, how do we optimize the portfolio? How do we make it better? How do we find where it's strong? Do we have way too many qualification prospects in our portfolio? And so do we, temper it out by moving some people around? And how, based on what we've seen as we've reviewed it and looked at what the portfolio composition is, how do we then assess it so that we can, what's the right word? Um, so that we can meet our goals, hit our KPIs, do that sort of thing. All right, so there we go. Next slide. So you need to have the right blend of prospects in your portfolio. This is very important. And unfortunately, there is no one right answer for what the perfect blend should be. There's never going to be one way to do it. Um, for any of you who caught my virtual book tour, this will be a story you've heard before, but I'm going to tell it again because it really applies here. So as we're looking for like what is the ideal composition of a portfolio, what percentage of a portfolio should be in each donor cycle stage, the answer to that is always going to be it depends. Like we might even know why it depends on things, but I think we can, over time we can make it less of an it depends and more of a this is how it should be situation at your organization because we have to stop worrying about how other organizations do it. As a great example, in my opinion, um, the composition of a Harvard portfolio versus the composition of where I work full time at Springfield Technical Community College, worlds apart. Harvard was founded in 1636. Where I work was founded in 1967. Harvard is a private research university. I work for a public community college. Worlds apart. Couldn't be more different. So the ideal blend for portfolios will be very different at both organizations. You also want to look at how your portfolio you might have your portfolio might be too heavy with a certain segment of people. So maybe all of your people have been in that portfolio long term and there's no one new, right? Some of our gift officers who've been around for a while and in the same position, not just that they're old like me, but but if they've been in the same position for a while, they might have a well-seasoned portfolio, but it's the same folks. And you want to keep trying to, encouraging to move some new names into that group because at some point their prospects will age out or be done giving or maybe move from major gifts to planned gifts. In any case, you want to make sure that they have some new folks coming in that they have to qualify and, slowly start to cultivate in those early stages of cultivation because it's going to matter when the other folks move out of their portfolio. And you
Ruthie,
want to, oh, yep, sorry.
sorry. One of the
Yep.
things that you're alluding to is us baby boomers are starting to fade out.
Okay.
And so the Gen X, Gen Z, and whatever comes after them, Gen Y, they're all much more diverse. They're much more
Mm-hmm.
age diverse and much more belief diverse. And so gift officers who are used to talking to the middle or older white guy who has a white collar job and drives a white car, you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
they have to either adapt to have different kinds of conversations or they
Mm-hmm.
have to retire. Are you seeing that from the customer clients that you talk to?
I think I'm seeing people are looking at like they have to bring in more younger folks into a portfolio. They still have the boomers in there because they're still going strong. Like they're not, they're not giving up the ghost yet. But they're looking at how do they have to bring in, even my generation, like the Gen Xers, not so much, but like the Gen Ys and Zs and whatever comes after that, like looking at those groups, how do they bring them into the portfolio and how do they have to treat them differently? Because they don't get cultivated the same way. Like a Gen Z and a boomer, totally different cultivation strategies. So you have to consider that as you're bringing them in as well.
Mhm. Amy Schultz has a question.
Oh, sure.
Do you have a recommendation for how many constituents should be in your lead pool? I assume we're discussing here the equivalent of
The
a
holding pool.
principal gift pool,
Yeah.
as opposed to a major gift pool that might be a bit
Yeah,
larger.
Amy, are you talking about lead annual giving or?
You can put it in the chat, Amy, if you
Sorry,
don't want to
yeah,
come off mute.
sorry. My question was with about 12 to 13 major gift officers, each
Mhm.
having about 100 prospects in their portfolios, what's a good amount to have in your holding pool or your lead pool to assess to move into those portfolios?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah. A part of it depends on how fast people are moving out or through the actual portfolio. So if a gift officer has 100 people in the portfolio, but they're averaging that 10 people either get disqualified or move out or move off to planned giving each year, they need at least enough in the holding pool so they can get 10 new ones in. So they need a minimum of 10,
Yeah.
say. But those 10 probably aren't going to be the 10. So you probably want to have like 25. Like,
Okay, are you saying like on an annual basis to move through or depending on
yeah,
how quickly they move through the pipeline, you mean, right?
yeah, like I'm saying, like if you moved 10 people out of a portfolio in a given year, you might want to make sure your holding pool has at least another
Oh,
10, if
got
not
it.
maybe
Got it.
25 to so you have some sort of buffer. But
Okay.
you don't need to have a holding pool of 100 just because their portfolio is 100 because that's just too big. And by the time they
Yeah.
move those 100 people out of the portfolio, the 100 you've already researched, you'll need to re-research
Hmm.
them to update stuff, which
Well, I
is
just
yeah.
I just find that my holding pool gets old after a while, you
Hmm.
know. So
Amy,
it's
Absolutely.
good
actually
to keep refreshing it.
what you're talking about is what I call the prospect to gift ratio. How many prospects does it take to make a gift?
Okay.
Hmm.
So if you have seven
Yeah.
prospects to get one gift, and every time you get a gift, you're pushing seven more prospects in, or every time a gift officer disqualifies, do you wait a few more prospects to qualification before you start pumping prospects in? And then
Yeah.
like Ruthie said, you're also adding that to timeline. So this once you figure out how long it takes to move a prospect from assignment to gift or assignment to disqualification, you will actually have your just-in-time prospect management system set up.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you taking my question. I know I jumped in a little late, so
No,
thank
perfectly
you.
fine. It's a great question. Yeah, and we'll find there's times like I've lived and some of you folks as well have lived through some of these things like when the housing market crashed. Um right when that happened, I had fairly recently screened my entire portfolio because that's what you did back then. You screened all of them at once, which now is just silly, but that's how a lot of screening companies are set up. And then the housing market crashed, so all of my screening data was no longer good because it was most of it was based on real estate. So sometimes there can be this one moment where everything that you have just goes out the window for data because it's not helpful. Or like when the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme happened, which actually wasn't that long. It was right around the same time as the housing market crash, because it was like a 1-2 punch. And if you had a lot of those names on your list, like all your people were no longer major gifts suddenly, like overnight. So there's moments in time where those kind of things happen. They're a little more extraordinary. They're not typical, but those are things we have to think about too as we have these holding pools. Like, we don't want them to suddenly come to a halt because the housing market crashes or a Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme happens again. So we want to make sure that we haven't done so much work that we can't redo it quickly, right? Because sometimes there's times where that has to happen. And I lived through that fun. And as a solo researcher back then, it was fun.
I hope you weren't like us and just launched your campaign 2 months before the housing crisis happened.
No, we were in a campaign at that organization at that time. We were in a campaign, but like the silent phase of it. But yeah, there was just a lot going on. And yeah, it was enough to give a girl an ulcer, right? Oh, so yeah, so as we're looking at our portfolios and thinking about them, like how we determine our composition, it's going to be different for each organization, just because we have we're different, right? Some of us here are educational, some of us are higher ed, some of us are secondary. There's some of us here on this call who might be from museums or hospitals or animal shelters, or there's other things I can't think of off the top of my head, but whatever your nonprofit organization is, you're going to have different ways. You need to look at how your portfolio is composed so you can reach your goals. All right, moving on to the next section. All right. So at this point, we have some idea of how to better manage our research queue and our holding pool using some just-in-time work. We understand we need to get our portfolio sizes where we want them using Dunbar's number and subtraction theory. And then we've taken a close look at our portfolios and adjusted the composition based on how we want to balance them and some criteria. So if we've done all that work, then we're really well positioned to create a strategy to achieve optimization for our portfolios, right? Oh, I see there's a question in the chat.
Yep.
Did I answer that
Yes,
one?
two questions, one from
Okay.
Jack, one from Eric.
Okay. So
So,
Jacqueline asks, do you differentiate between one-time gift and pledged donors? And does that change recommendations in the composition and size and prospect ratios? I don't at my current organization. I've had at others, and I think it depends on where you work. Like I'm in a very small organization, so all donors are the same here right now. But at other places, one-time gifts and pledge donors were treated differently. At other organizations that were bigger, and we had more staff. So depending on your organization, you might treat them differently. Um, and then that would play into how you're going to look at how you want to compose your portfolios. But it's a hard question to answer because it hinges on so much. It depends. Like if you're at a museum, you're going to look at things differently. If you're a small animal shelter, very different. If you're large health organization, different as well. So, all right. And there's another question. What is your thought on having auxiliary discovery portfolio in addition to the primary? So you're saying, Eric, that your gift officer has a primary portfolio, but they also have like a identification or qualification, however you want to phrase it, section group of people within their portfolio. Is that what I'm understanding? Yes.
Or is it there? Oh, sorry.
Um, I feel okay with that, but I also count those as their portfolio. I don't think of them as two separate portfolios because once they have had those people in what you're calling the auxiliary/discovery portfolio, once they've discovered them and they've discovered that they can move, from that stage to maybe cultivation, or discovered that they are not going to be your major gift prospect and move them out, like these are prospects they're working with. So I always argue that there should be one portfolio rather than two because we don't want our gift officers to feel too schizophrenic. And that work matters. I think they focus so much on the work towards getting the gift that qualification work sometimes gets pushed aside, not because they're lazy or don't want to do it, just because they don't have time. They've been told their goal is to, sorry, I got a frog in my throat. They've been told their goal is to bring in the money. So that's where they're focused. So it's our job from like prospect development and project management side to remind them like, we have to work on these couple of qualification people. So you have the next group of folks coming into cultivation as folks move out of cultivation. Thus,
and
it's one portfolio to me.
And if I could chime in, I just, as
Yeah.
speaking as someone who's working on reporting and software for prospect management, it seems to me that having a segmentation within a portfolio is easier to report on than having two separate portfolios. So if you think about someone's a prospect's space on the timeline. So are they qualification? Are they identification? Then move on to cultivation, solicitation, stewardship. I think it's easier just to think of those auxiliary discovery prospects as identification, qualification prospects within the main portfolio. And that's a lot easier to report on.
Yeah. But to play devil's advocate, and maybe this might help, Eric, I'm not sure what your situation is. I've worked at places where they wanted to look at them as two separate portfolios because they were grading. I don't think that's the right word. The gift officers differently based on their work doing that discovery work, and then the quote unquote core portfolio, which was the cultivation, solicitation, stewardship group. So I didn't win that fight, and the gift officers weren't always happy because they were told they had to live in two worlds, and it was confusing for them. And I think it also messed up the reporting a little bit. But that's what leadership wanted, so that's what they were doing. And sometimes that's you just have to roll with it because you're not in the position to change the structure at that point in time. So, but if that's a situation you're in, Eric, please feel free to get in touch with me. We'll chat. All right. So I want to talk. So I want to talk a little bit about creating your strategy so you can help to achieve some optimization for your portfolios. So when we think about how we define these, and these are Merriam-Webster dictionary, which strangely, I work at this place called Springfield Community College, Technical Community College. Down the street from me is the original Merriam-Webster building. It even says it right on the building. They still work there. So near and dear to my heart, the Merriam-Webster people. But so strategy is how these are our long-term plans, and the optimization work is the work that we do to make those strategies happen while making those small adjustments along the way. So if you think back to what we talked about a little earlier today, strategy, that is the management, and optimization is the maintenance of this all. So with strategy, if you're doing strategy for the portfolio overall, we're going to align it with the fundraisers. We're going to prioritize our opportunities. We're going to drive our results. And then the optimization is that systematic process of adjusting some variables to make things work right. So moving people in and out of a portfolio, maybe making sure that the right blend is there, always futzing, I think is the technical term, with the portfolio to make sure that it's maximized to get the best results for your gift officer. So the optimization piece, it's not a one-time event. It's a continuous process, sorry. And you have to look at those, gift capacity ratings, the time from when a prospect is assigned to the time they make a gift, how long does it take, and how do we set up our holding pool? How many gift officers do we have? And how does that affect how we set up our portfolios? And I think one thing we should consider as we're thinking about all this work is, especially with AI coming more into play in our work, is are there aspects of all of this that we can automate to a certain degree? And I worked at one organization where we were automating the holding pool itself to a degree. We did some analysis, used some data points, had some fun in Excel and I think Power BI. I don't remember what we were doing. It's been a while. And then we prioritized the holding pool. And then when someone needed to move into a portfolio, we knew who the sort of quote unquote number one person was to move in, but we'd still look at maybe the top 10 of them. Because sometimes of who rated as number one based on data points wasn't actually the person you should move in. So it was automated up to a point, which was helpful. And we created it so that the prioritization refreshed overnight. So they had a lot of resources at that organization. At a small place, this would be harder to maintain, perhaps, but it's still possible. So, but there's aspects of the work we can probably, optimize and not optimize, automate. That's the right word.
So
So,
sorry, can I step in here?
absolutely.
Optimization is actually a statistical technique. And so it's available in Python. It's available in Excel because Greg loves Excel, so he made sure it is. And it's available in
Microsoft
R.
Solver, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
and Solver. So, and what it is these are the constraints that we have. We only can do 100 people. This
Yep.
gift officer can only travel to these places, and then it takes modeling data like linear regression or decision trees or random forest, which is a crap ton of decision trees hanging out together. And it uses that and it says, with the constraints that you have, here are the best prospects for this portfolio. It's a wicked cool technique. So far, I practiced on it using trying to do fantasy basketball.
Oh,
What's my best basketball team to use in FanDuel? So, um, and I then I started competing with the bigger and bigger boys, and they actually paid attention to basketball. So I didn't get to finish, but I do. It's really cool to use it for that optimization piece.
yeah, very cool. All right. So at this point, I'm sort of done with my spiel. But this is a good time for anyone who has questions, comments, discussion. If we missed your question in the chat,
Darshana has a question on tips and best practices to ensure that gift officers are prioritizing qualification prospects throughout the year. And if I could simply say something, I think that's a reporting issue.
mm, can be. Yeah. I think sometimes also they're not sometimes they're not prioritizing their qualification prospects because they have their eyes on hitting that financial goal. How much money do they have to bring in for the
That's very
fiscal
true
year?
too.
So sometimes they're being, pressured is probably a very aggressive word for it, into focusing on one end of that spectrum and not so much on the qualification folks. And I think that's where prospect management and prospect development staff come in and remind them, like, you know what, here's a really good person. Here's someone who's really interesting. Here's a little more information on them, and encourage them to, like, if you just did X, Y, and Z, this person might move into cultivation, or at least move out of your portfolio if they're not your person. So sometimes it takes a little bit of work on our end to help move things along. And I realize that we don't manage them in the same way that their supervisor does, and we certainly don't police them. So we walk a fine line between seeming, shrill about it and seeming helpful. So be cautious when you go there. Oh, sorry. It just zips through a bunch of slides for no reason. Oh, yeah, we have some upcoming stuff. I'm just going to slide through these as folks have questions and stuff. So, oh, there's another question in the chat, I think. Yes, maybe. Current,
Sandra has a question.
okay, sorry. We're currently growing our portfolio across the organization. How do you balance filling portfolios with building up a holding pool to ensure future pipeline health? I think the most important thing in that scenario is that you build the portfolios. I think the holding pool comes secondary to that, because if you know that your portfolio is, like, say you have 4 gift officers, I'm picking easy math, and each one needs a portfolio of 25 people. You have to research and put 100 people into portfolios. If the research is already done, great. If it's not, you got your work cut out for you. And once you get those initial 100 people for portfolios, 25 people each, then you can start building your holding pool. So I think you do it gradually. I mean, if you have a bigger shop, if there's, say, 5 researchers, it's easier to get there. If you're the chief cook and bottle washer and you have other responsibilities, it will take you longer to get there. And I think you just have to remind, in the small shop situation, folks that you're working with to be patient, because you can't do everything at once. And sometimes that's where we find ourselves sitting. But if you're in a bigger shop, you can get there pretty quickly, and then you can try and figure out, because you've just built the portfolio, you have to guess a little bit. I know it's not very scientific, at how fast a prospect might move through or out of a portfolio. So you know how big of a holding pool they need. And start small. Start with 10, start with 15, and then slowly build from there. And if you find they don't need more than 10 or 15, you're great. But if they need 25, you add a few more. All right.
I'm just throwing sales pitches into the chat.
Yep. So yeah. So we have a book, an authors panel coming up next week, where there's going to be a whole bunch of us talking, and Jen Phil is going to facilitate it, also a book author. So that could be fun, and it's free. So please do come if you can. We have a new course online, self-paced, where you can learn everything about how to build a prospect management system from beginning to end. So that's helpful. I'm going to let Marianne tote this one.
So I've gotten a lot of call for RFM training and content. So there is an online RFM course on the Staupell webpage under resources. There is also there is also a book out under my name about how to build RFM, not only an overall RFM score, but also like an RFM for plan giving, major gifts, engagement, and I forget what the fifth thing is. And then we've just recently, for people who are like, look, I don't want to read the book and figure out all that coding you loaded your book with. I just want to just push a button. We just launched our Excel add-in. So So if you could have a new ribbon on your Excel that says Staupell Tools, and then there's buttons to import your data, and then there's buttons to assess the overall RFM. And then we'll be adding the other four sections from the book
And
for a
Marianne,
more expensive
just
tool.
to answer a question in chat, what is RFM?
RFM is recency, frequency, monetary value, and it's another retail uh, technique that people use. So Amazon has a how recently have you made a purchase? How frequently you make purchases on there? And then what is your lifetime Amazon spending? For us, it's how frequently have you made a gift? How recently was your last gift? And then what's your lifetime giving value? And people have used RFM for assessing annual giving segmentation, which is perfect, and as well as looking for major gifts. And then if you look for people who are very recent and frequent, but they're not high on the lifetime giving or the monetary value, you actually have plan giving prospects.
Yeah,
So
I've
thank you,
actually
Ruthie,
used,
for building that QR code so I don't have to keep looking for links and looking like I'm not paying attention.
yeah, yeah. But for those who are, smaller shop, RFM is a great way to really quickly figure out how to segment your people from annual fund to major gift to plan giving.
Hmm.
And I've used it when I was the solo all of prospect development person. So it made my life much easier. So
Hmm.
those are fun. Now I saw another question or two in the chat, so let me scroll back because I don't want to miss them. All right, we have someone saying, did they miss it? Regarding the pool of researched 100, am I understanding that these 100-ish have been researched and held against specific criteria to be deemed qualified? So I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, like either hop in the chat or just come off mute. I think you're referring to the holding pool of people who you would have in a holding pool of say 100 or so people. Um, they're being held there because we've researched them for reasons. Um, maybe we were asked to, maybe we've decided to, maybe because of a screening, we thought here's some folks we should research and see if they're going to be major gift folks for us. And the reason I'm being held in a holding pool is because there's no space in a portfolio to move them into. When your holding pool gets big enough, actually, it makes the case for hiring another gift officer, right? So if your holding pool is 500 people, maybe someone needs to talk about hiring another gift officer because that's 500 people who aren't being cultivated, aren't being engaged with, aren't being seen in a way that we're moving them towards a major gift. So there's that. But if I misunderstood the question, I think it was from Amy, please let me
Yeah,
know.
just real quick, just to understand, so these are not folks that we've talked to yet, so we still don't know that they're interested in being
Right.
part of the organization. So I'm just getting clarity on that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. They're folks who like we identified them as potential prospects, but no one's really maybe someone's seen them like through maybe they've come to an event or they were a volunteer, but they've not been cultivated in the way our other major gift folks have. So they haven't gotten to the point where we even know that they should stay in a portfolio. All right. Did I miss any other questions?
Yeah, Michelle Smith had one on what
Okay.
checkpoints visuals have you found most useful in supporting healthy portfolio churn, which sounds like making butter, but
I
yes,
know.
I understand what you mean, Michelle.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, the visuals I like to use are just ones that sort of show nice breakdowns of a portfolio in different ways. Break it down by the gift capacity, break it down by donor cycle stage, break it down by RFM if you have it, or any other like engagement scores if you have other types of scores that you've gotten through vendors or whatnot. Um, because sometimes if you see the data through a slightly different lens, you can see pockets of opportunity. And then it helps you figure out like, here's someone you should be focusing on, and here's some folks who really probably shouldn't be in your portfolio at this time. But I like to break it down in that way. And the data points I use are pretty basic. I mean,
Mhm.
gift capacity has to be one of them, of course. When
Mhm.
I did a project where I was looking for not major, plan giving donors, we were trying to figure out people. It was very specific. It was strange. We were trying to figure out people who could be plan giving donors of real estate to an organization. And it was an all women's college that
Mhm.
we were talking about. So we looked at unmarried women or women who had no children. And so those were specific data points. So depending on how you're like if you are putting together some kind of very specialized portfolio or a plan giving portfolio, your data points are going to be a little different than if you're putting together major gifts, right? So bear
Mhm.
that in mind. And every organization has slightly different data that they use.
Mhm.
So when I was working at the all women's college, we looked at things differently, like the marital information and the children and being a widow married a lot more than it did when I was working in a co-ed institution.
Mhm.
Mhm. And if I could chime in, I would also say, Michelle, in addition to time and stages, I would also look at time since last action because if someone is staying in the same stage, sometimes that's because they don't want to move. It's just taking them longer to move. But time since last action tells you when is the last time a specific development officer actually tried to move the relationship. So I would say both are important.
All right, I'm going to come off the share so I can see everybody. There you all are. Look at that. All right. Did we miss any questions? The chat seems to have been zipping along, so hopefully I didn't miss anything. No. Are we all feeling pretty good about like getting back to work and setting up our portfolios? They're going to be awesome. In another month, they're going to look spectacular. Yes? Well, maybe not a month. It's an odd time of year for some folks.
Oh, and before we go, I should mention it was almost mentioned in the session, but I'm working on a prospect management Excel tool, which is similar in structure to the RFM in Excel tool, but it's going to give you all of the data you need to be able to make these decisions, and the charts and reports are taken from Ruthie's book.
Even
And
I'm
that will
looking
be out
forward to
at some
using that.
And that will be out at some point. Hopefully sooner. Definitely by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Oh, you're on mute, Marianne.
It's not necessarily Greg, it's me and the marketing team that are slowing him down. So yell at us and let Greg finish his work. Ruthie, we're getting lots of thank yous.
You're welcome.
And somebody wrote, Mackenzie wrote, I'm ready to go shuffle the deck.
Ooh,
So
nice.
Yeah, I
I like that idea,
those.
Mackenzie.
Yeah.
Yes.
And feel free if you use some of this stuff to let us know how it works. Because it's always nice to hear like real life examples. Like I tried some of those techniques and here's the success I had, or here's the confusion that befell us.
hmm
Because sometimes it's the times that we don't get things quite right, like as we as individuals doing this work, you learn just as much. Like I learned so much from the things that I screwed up over the course of my career.
Mm.
Yeah, like so much. Because you make those mistakes once, right? So always good to hear those things. Always good to hear the stories. Right. We'll hang out for a little bit in case anyone else wants to chat or ask a question. But I think we're right at the top of the hour. So
hmm
yeah, I know folks may have places to go, but if folks want to chat or ask questions, we're still here.
Yeah. Everybody's got to go
I know, back to the real world.
back to the grind. Yeah. All right, lots of thank yous.
Oh,
Yes.
good.
Yep. I have at 1 o'clock with Gayla.
And we can email anytime with questions. Yes, Amy.
Yeah, you can email me.
Yes.
Yeah, email me. Or actually email me or Ruthie. Ruthie gets back to you. Greg, we've got Greg working on stuff.
I'll still get back to people. I mean,
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm being a
I'm not
protective and you don't need it. Okay, Amy, yes, email any one of us.
gonna.
That's
We're
funny.
always happy to help, Amy.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right, I think we're good.
Did you
Amy,
stop the recording
And
yet?
yeah.
oh yeah.